Hello, hello, everyone. Just wait a minute more for a few more people to come in. And we'll get started in a moment. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today on your lunch break or with your morning coffee, depending on what time zone you're joining us from. My name is Rachel Small. I'm the Director of Publicity at Astra Publishing House, and I am thrilled to introduce the Astra House Fall 2025 debut fiction preview. We can't wait for you to hear from our editors and authors about these two stunning novels, Happy Bad by Delaney Nolan and Underspin by Zhao. Just a tiny bit of housekeeping before we begin. As a reminder, this is a webinar, and thus only our authors and editors have their mics and cameras on when I bring them into the room. The chat is open for now, so feel free to ask questions there, and if we have time, we'll try to answer them. The format of the event is as follows. First, Maya will speak with Zhao about her novel. Then Emily will speak with Delaney Nolan about hers. Finally, in a fun little twist, the authors will ask each other questions about their debuts and the experience of writing and publishing them. Now, I am so excited to introduce our first author-editor pair, Maya and Zhao. Welcome, welcome. Zhao is a writer from St. Louis. Her work has appeared in the Georgia Review, Electric Lit, and Chicago Review of Books, among others, and she edits fiction for Joyland magazine. She holds an MFA in prose from the University of Michigan and a BA in history from Harvard College. Her fiction has been recognized by the Georgia Review Prose Prize, the LeBaron Russell Briggs Prize, and various Hopwood Awards. Her debut novel, Underspin, which Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah called an eruption of a debut, will be published on September 23rd and was acquired by Maya Raiford Cohen. Maya is an associate editor interested in politically attentive and progressive literary fiction and serious nonfiction. She loves ambitious projects with a strong political point of view that have something inventive and essential to argue about capitalism, colonialism and imperialism, race, gender, and geography. She's always excited to read books about the workplace and labor, campus novels, speculative or dystopian fiction, books about violence and its transmutability, and books about or within the world of sports. Now, without further ado, I'll pass the proverbial mic to Maya.
Hi, everyone. It's really exciting to be here and doing this panel with you, and it's nice to see you, Emily. Yeah, I guess this is going to be a little informal and sort of chatty, but yeah, so obviously I'm so in love with this book. It was one of the first things that came across my desk when I started at Astra. So we kind of are like debuting together in this sort of bizarre, charming way. I was really like thrilled to encounter this. I feel like it was one of the things that I said, I feel like in our meeting, and that like still kind of keeps coming back to me a lot, is that this is a book about the sort of indignities of ambition and the ways that competition and sort of insecurity make us sort of lesser people at times, but then also like bring out the absolute best in us at others. But one of the things that I was sort of delighted to learn about when I did encounter this book, and as you and I got to know each other in the editorial process, is that you yourself grew up playing table tennis competitively. And I think that you recently sent our marketing team some photos of you playing as a young kid, which are like literally the cutest and most serious thing ever. But I feel like this sort of that personal experience is so like sort of deeply felt in the book. And I think one of my favorite things about that novel, and honestly about just like what I love in good fiction often, is this sort of sense of expertise and precision. I feel like you've really like done a great job of enmeshing the reader in what is like truly this totally peripheralized circuit, but that for some is a really like sort of spiritually competitive undertaking. And so the action scenes just feel so like tactile, and to use a a word that has appeared a lot in the blurbs, kinetic, um, and like the sort of specificities of the mechanics of the sport itself are rendered sort of so expertly. And I feel like when you read it, you really get the sense that like only someone who's like lived this experience of competitively hitting a small ball across a net could have written this book. So I guess my first question is I want to hear a little bit more about that career and why you felt you needed to sort of memorialize it and fictionalize it in your debut.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Maya. I love hearing you talk about my book. It makes I understood more than I did when I was writing it, which was, we'll talk about just the process of groping through that. But yeah, I'm happy to speak about my personal experience with table tennis a bit and how it informed the debut. I grew up playing competitively pretty intensely from the ages of 9 to about 15 or 16. And then kind of burned out and quit and was playing club casually through school. But I grew up in St. Louis. I trained in my coach's basement where she had 4 tables. She was a former professional player from Shanghai and just taught like 20 to 30 kids out of her house. And also her 2 sons who played on the national team for many years. I never got that good, but I was playing tournaments around the Midwest a lot and often in other parts of the country. When I was playing the most, I was probably training 10 to 12 hours a week. And that probably sounds like an unusual circumstance to be playing 10 hours of table tennis a week in someone's basement in the Midwest. But it's also kind of emblematic of the American table tennis experience, where the sport is very fragmented. It's mostly driven by former pros who immigrated from China or other top table tennis countries, and wherever the wind blows them, they, might decide to start a club. And I think that is that's one of several reasons that I felt this material was what I wanted to explore in my debut. I think table tennis specifically creates this proximity between some of the universal glamour and hustle of sport, which in the US is often like a huge corporatized endeavor and production. But on the other hand, table tennis here is specifically very marginal, like you were saying. It's got a big underdog spirit. The community is very small. People who play recreationally are an eclectic bunch of retirees and immigrants, and they're very devoted and nerdy and all know each other. And so it felt like a a fitting arena on which to stage a lot of questions that I have personally and artistically about, growing up in a really white place, feelings of inadequacy or uncertainty that are inculcated in us by our society from a very young age. Feelings of competition, like you were saying, that are explicit in sports, but that, drive capitalism and drive a lot of the ambitions that we have day to day. So I think that drew me. I realized as I was editing the book is what it was about. I think more primally when I was in the early stages, it just was the thing that shaped my formative years. A lot of life lessons I internalized about ambition, dedication, social hierarchies, friendship, self-worth, love, all of those things happened within table tennis or were strongly inflected by it. I was spending 12 hours a week around table tennis people. So it's really hard to separate myself from the sport. And so I'm glad to hear that it came across on the page. I will also say I feel like I know just enough to be able to write about it well. I was never in the top tier of players in the US, but I think that having crashed out a little bit and feeling like I'd never reached the level that I wanted to actually made it possible for me to write this book that is about the community and about a lot of people who witness greatness or desire greatness, but don't end up achieving it quite the way they want.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said about this sort of like cultural export this sort of like this product, this like underground. Oh, hello. This like Emily, you're welcome to join us and talk about table tennis. Yeah, this sort of like cultural export of the sort of Asian American community, and this sort of like this site and sort of like agora of the immigrant community, being these like scattered basements across the United States where like, you know, people are sort of doing this this exchange of like sort of, you know, talent, but also are like sort of building out this community, and having also like playing the role as a community building exercise. Like obviously one of the sort of locations in the book that takes a lot of precedence, and it's where we start the book and we revisit it at the end, is the Asian American Community Center. And just, yeah, the role that that plays in the sort of in Ryan's life and in everybody else's life. And how a lot of people, you know, find jobs and find meaning and you know, grieve there. And there's a lot of sort of richness there, I think, in this interaction between sport and community. Speaking of sports and sports like literature, obviously, I think there's been a little bit of like a recent renaissance of sports literature. Recently from There's Always This Year, there was Headshot, Godwin. These are like some of the comps that kind of came to mind to us as we were working on this book and sort of getting ready to publish it and bring it to market. Next season, I'm also publishing a really big literary history of the Mets, and Emily is also, or Emily Bell, who's here with us, is also publishing a novel about a very sad tennis player. And I guess I'm, you know, curious to ask you, like, what is it maybe that you think is so compelling about the short sports genre right now, and why, if at all, do you think it's sort of having this moment in highbrow cultural production? How do you feel that Underspin fits into that conversation at all? I know you just went on a very big and exciting reporting trip to, is it US Smash? Is that what it's called? Yeah, which is the big national table tennis tournament that was in Las Vegas this year. Honestly, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that, but then also just like, how are people like thinking about sort of sports right now and like the role that they're playing in our lives? And yeah, what like other sort of maybe books about sports or movies or whatever were you thinking about as you were sort of tackling Underspin?
Yeah, this is a big question. I'll try to keep it succinct, but I have many theories about the elements at play, and I'm, you know, sure sports journalists or other people immersed in the world will have contradicting opinions, but I'll take a stab. I would say on the more heartening side, um, you know, we're seeing more people with peripheral or minoritized perspectives writing about these subjects, which used to be a site of, or at least like I perceived it, a site of mainstream machismo stories. It was always boxing or baseball. It was just like, which those stories also have value, but I think until recently it felt like not a place where such perspectives existed or were welcome. And so we've seen a lot of breakouts in the last 10 years. Like some of the books you listed, I'm also thinking of Annalise Chen's So Many Olympic Exertions, Quan Barry's We Ride Upon Sticks, Ross Gay's basketball poem, Beholding. And so I think when I was writing Underspin, I felt like the tent had been expanded for me and I could step into it in a way that's also reflective of larger trends in publishing, right? The stated appetite for diverse fiction over the last 10 years definitely played a role in that, I feel. And like good sports fiction always probes the costs of winning and losing. And I think this is a perfect lens for some of those feelings I was talking about of like being on the outside, larger investigations into the like vicious competition and drive built into our society. Maybe like less hearteningly to me, I also think like the broader shift toward sports, and maybe this is my just like pet personal conspiracy, isn't to some degree also reflective of like polarizing and conservative forces that are gripping our society. We're like deeply divided in a lot of other cultural arenas. And I feel like sometimes the playing field is one of the last places where there's a semblance or illusion of meritocracy. One of the last places to celebrate like the pure beauty of human achievement. Though, of course, sports are highly political and politicized, and that ideal of human beauty that I just described was also used in like the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany. So it is a bit fraught. And even as someone who loves sports and writes about sports and is very lucky to be here with a book about sports forthcoming, part of my feeling witnessing the cultural production of sport is like we're trying to exhume meaning from one of the last places that hasn't been like ripped seam to seam yet. Um, of course, that's a very pessimistic way to frame it. And like basically all the books that you've described, including the forthcoming Astra ones, are using sports as a lens on society and its injustices and things far beyond sports. So, um, perhaps I overall still skew more toward the first like positive assessment, but the second one I feel has to be said and affected the tournament that I attended as well. You know, a major player was declined for a visa because he had competed in Cuba twice a few years ago and he wasn't permitted into the country. There were problems with tariffs. So as much as that tournament wanted to be a celebratory inauguration of table tennis in the US, you just can't bury your head in the sand and
Yeah.
away from everything happening.
Yeah. I mean, no, that was a sort of incredibly considered answer that I feel like I have not sort of thought that deeply about that question before. But yeah, I mean, sports are always the site of politics. I think that we like to like sort of believe that they're sort of removed because of, yes, this sort of meritocracy fetish, but you know, it's I mean, and of course, like I think you know, you state so beautifully that there is a sort of like equitability of the playing field and like it's sort of democratic sort of impulse to it all, but yeah, that it's still the sort of conditions under which the sport is played will always be subject to the sort of edicts of the day. Yeah, I think also part of the reason why I was so like sort of obsessed with this novel when it first came across my desk is it was the summer of 2024, which was when the Olympics were happening, which I think I was literally seated from like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day, like watching the Olympics in the background. And like, there's also something so fascinating about the Olympics is this sort of like, which I love that you brought up, but as this sort of like nation building exercise too. This is probably getting way far away from the book. But like, you know, the idea of the Olympics is this sort of nation building exercise, but then all of these athletes who sort of get caught up in that parading and in that sort of flag waving. Yeah, my like great dream in life is that one day somebody writes like a dystopian Olympics novel and like 100 years in the future and like sort of as the world is collapsing and borders are sort of, you know, devolving and what does it mean to like champion one's country in the wake of a dying world. If anyone out there wants to write that novel for me,
You're giving out good ideas on me.
yeah, I know this is like that was free. Anyway, so I guess maybe like shifting away from sports, writing in public. This is maybe a little bit of a basic question, but and Rachel, let us know how we're doing on timing. But writing and publishing a novel is a really enormous undertaking. I have no confidence in myself that I could ever be able to do it. So what do you feel like was the most sort of like unexpected thing that you learned in this process? I know that seems maybe kind of a quiet question, but I'm actually just very curious.
No, that was a great question, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. I mean, one less rich answer is just like the extent to which there's always more to do. Well, I would say, okay, maybe the most interesting responses thematically are ones where I feel like actually sports and writing had some overlap. So the first very like woo-woo Coach K one is there's always another level to it. I thought I understood how many drafts and how many new questions I could ask over the course of writing a book. And I was always wrong by like degrees of magnitude. And but I feel really grateful to have had the chance to go through that process. And the other one, I think the other thing is like, I can't remember where I read this, but it's also in sports. Just this idea of focusing on what you can do well and feel like is in your wheelhouse and building that up and not hyper fixating on things that don't come as naturally to you or that will always be imperfect. I got that advice from coaches before, and as I worked on this book, I felt it ringing true. Um, Great authors, and I'm borrowing someone else's idea again, but great authors, usually there's a few things that they do in an inimitable way, and then it covers up the other stuff that they're not interested in doing or just like aren't as good at. And um, I felt that in Underspin, especially in later stages of editing and thematically shaping, where it's like you can't be afraid of the things that you are drawn toward or the things that you know you might not have the capacity to like make as good as you want them to be. That's just like you're forced to confront yourself as a person and a thinker the same way that you're forced to confront yourself on a table tennis court or any other playing arena. And I didn't expect for it to be so stark when I was writing a book.
That is such an elegant and gracious answer. And thank you. I think that's probably, Rachel, is that wrapping up our time?
Yeah, unless you have one last question you want to get in.
No, I think we should end on that note because it was
wonderful. I thought it was a pretty perfect note
yeah.
too. Thank you so much, Maya and Emily. I am going to bring in now our second author editor pair, Emily Bell and Delaney Nolan. Bring Delaney in. Delaney Nolan received her MFA in fiction from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was a Rona Jaffe Fellow. She has since received a Pushcart Prize, 2 Academy American Poets Prizes, and a Fulbright Fellowship in fiction. Her fiction has appeared in Electric Literature, Guernica, Oxford American, Tin House, and elsewhere, and has been adapted into a radio play and a short film. Her work has been translated into Arabic, Bulgarian, Italian, and Polish. Based in New Orleans, she has also received recognition for her reporting in The Guardian, The Intercept, BBC, Al Jazeera, Mother Jones, and elsewhere. She's the author of Happy Bad, which Jamie Attenberg called an exhilarating, dynamic, addictive debut, publishing October 14th and acquired by Emily Bell. Emily is the editorial director of Astra House. Previously, she was the head of editorial at Zando, where she edited Steve Almond's All the Secrets of the World, Lydia Kiesling's Mobility, and Holly Wilson's Kitten Tits, among other titles. She also curated and published the Atlantic Editions, a publishing partnership with the Atlantic magazine. Prior to Zando, Emily spent a decade at Farrar, Strausson Giroux, most recently as executive editor and the director of the paperback original line, FSG Originals, which launched early work from Amelia Gray, Catherine Lacey, and Laura Vandenberg. At Astra, Emily acquires literary fiction and select nonfiction. And now, take it away, Emily.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi, Delaney. Delaney's with us from Paris, so we can all be very jealous. She's going to start eating a baguette very soon. Are you actually? That would be fun. Yeah, super happy to be here. Super happy to talk about Happy Bad, which you guys should all check out on NetGalley or some other form of reading books. This one's excellent. And I'm going to make Delaney talk about it just because she will do a far better job than I. So yeah, Delaney, will you give us a little kind of elevator pitch about your brilliant debut novel, Happy Bad?
That's fair. Let me just get my baguette from off screen. It's fun to hear your bio, by the way. I ended up having to read mine a bunch, so that was fun. Happy Bad. Yeah, Happy Bad follows the staff and residents at a treatment center for teenage girls in East Texas when an extreme heat wave triggers a regional blackout and it forces them to evacuate. So Elevator pitch. This book is interested in the medicalization of trauma, but also especially the climate crisis and migration or freedom of movement, and also female rage, I would say.
Yeah, I would say yes as well. And
Nice.
it's handled like brilliantly and seriously, but also with just a lot of humor, very smart humor, which I think is a requirement when you're dealing with, a group of people who are, sort of consistently and sustainedly marginalized. It is so messed up that like if you can't find the humor in it, I don't know. What are we
Totally.
gonna do? Uh, but this novel is set like it starts in East Texas, and it's near future. Climate has been ravaged by climate change. It is dusty, it is hot as balls, and it is just like deeply uncomfortable. And you write that so well. And then sort of one of my favorite things about this novel is that it starts feeling very contained in this treatment center with these girls who are like, I was gonna say they're going crazy, but they've been crazy. It's been quelled, and then they go crazy again, and it's so well done. But it does take place in this kind of container, and they're stuck inside because it's so hot outside, especially after this blackout happens, and they can't leave because it's too oppressive. But eventually they do, and it kind of cracks open into what turns out to be kind of like a half road trip novel, which I really love. And so we get these really like the interesting this interesting perspective and these interesting sort of planes of space, but in different ways. And I guess I want to hear about your experience in these spaces and how these like places and these landscapes informed your writing, and both in sort of the dusty part of East Texas, but also especially in the second half, which I believe is like mostly at the end, like in Louisiana where Delaney lives. So yeah, can you just talk about place a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. I love that like breakdown of how place works, and all the different places it takes place in. So it is very much like in the South. It made sense like it had to be set in the South, I think, not just because I live in the South. I live in Louisiana. I've lived there for about 7 years. And before that I lived in North Carolina. And I think Southern literature gets kind of slept on. Like I want to see more Southern literature represented in a contemporary way. Um, and I think needs to be set in the South, or like that's a really important place for it to be set because Texas and Florida and Louisiana are the states that are seeing some of the most climate disasters, are the places that are experiencing the most, um, with the exception of California, are the places that are seeing sort of the most immediate displacement, storms, extreme heat. Um, and living in Louisiana, especially the last few years, I've really become like even more keenly aware of how heat affects everything you do when it becomes present, when it becomes a threat. Like I think I could have made it even hotter now. Like I've said this to you before, but the book was like more speculative when I started. And now I'm like, actually it could have gotten even more painfully hot than that. You just have to deal with it. Um, Around the time I guess this was right around the time that we started sending it out to publishers. It was like the hottest summer New Orleans has ever experienced. Like the point where like the mayor was on the radio being like, no one alive has experienced a summer this hot in New Orleans. And I was sitting in my like at my desk writing stuff about heat, and our air conditioning couldn't keep up really, which also just like I'd finished the book by this point, but it was also showing up in the book. And so it was like 85 degrees in my house, and I'm writing about how like heat makes your heart pump harder and it sends sweat to the surface of your skin so you can cool down. It makes your gut permeable and like your kidneys start to struggle and you get dehydrated and yada yada. And meantime, I'm like dumping sweat and like my heart is pounding, which makes me anxious because then your brain is like, I guess we're panicking because we're hot and our heart is pounding hard. And it becomes this crazy feedback cycle. So being in Louisiana just in like a physical way informed some of the book because I was aware of the dangers of heat and how it makes you it adds to the crazy. I mean, it really wages a psychological toll. And it's also separately, the South is just like so beautiful when it's not driving you insane and deadly, or even when it is. Southern Louisiana and East Texas, I think, are just like gorgeous, unregulated places on the margins. Unregulated isn't things that I'm celebrating, but yeah, beautiful, beautiful places. So it had to be there.
Yeah, so dreamy. I love, love, love it down there. I'm sorry you had to go through that physical experience, or that you continue to experience that, and probably will, like, as soon as you return home with your back.
Yeah.
Uh, but the read, it's so visceral, and it's and clearly you had to really experience it yourself in order to write it. But on the page, it's I started swimming when I was reading it, so
Oh, good.
thank you for that. Yeah, for all of the like pain and discomfort and like true like psychic disruption that is caused by climate change, and you write that so convincingly and effectively in the book, but you still manage to be hopeful. This and I'm not going to try to say exactly why, but I wonder how you managed to sort of maintain that and express that as you were simultaneously writing about the awfulness.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at first I didn't. I think I have said this to you, that earlier drafts were bleaker, and especially the ending went to like quite a different place. Right now they kind of they end in the sort of a community that feels like something is possible. And that wasn't really present in early drafts. And at the time when I was like working on this earlier version, I think was working under kind of an assumption that it did need to be a little bleak in order to be realistic. But I think not only does that like not work on a narrative level, like we get enough dead ends in real life, I think it also isn't realistic. Because we as individuals and as communities, we do get overwhelmed. But it's, I think, fairly rare that we do experience what seems like the end of hope. And I do personally feel hopeful, even despite or because of having concentrated a lot on climate change and reported on it a good deal in the last few years. I wouldn't say I feel optimistic, which I think is a little different, but I definitely feel hopeful. Um, Partially because, like, at the risk of sounding pretty corny, we do get to work on what is like the most momentous issue in the history of humanity. Hopefully, like with our friends and family, and that's exciting, I think. But also, like, some of the experiences that I drew on to write Happy Bad are still now, like, separately things that I think of as being like major points of hope for me. So, like one of the places that inspired what you're talking about is a sort of like claustrophobic institutional place where things feel like they're maybe spiraling out of control, is partially drawn from, in 2016, I worked at a refugee camp for Syrian refugees in Thessaloniki, Greece. And not to like go on a huge tangent about it, but there are a lot of dynamics there that have really interested me and that I was like kind of exploring with this book about how purposelessness is like a really difficult thing to deal with, and also being these places where the people in power, the people running it, maybe aren't that qualified, maybe including myself, and also how often in these institutions that are meant to protect especially marginalized or vulnerable people, they end up recreating the sort of same harmful dynamics of power that have hurt those people in the first place. That said, one of the things that I really try to always remember when I am feeling hopeless is that there were so many people who were quietly working away, doing really important good work at that camp and at a bunch of other camps like it. And we don't really hear about it because they're so busy just actually like doing the things that matter. They're like doing these good, important things at an interpersonal level. And there's so many people who are doing that, but they're just doing it very quietly. And then a really key thing for the end of the book was actually an experience I had that like drove me into journalism, to be honest. It was after Hurricane Ida, after 2021, and I went down to like the bayous of Louisiana, which had gotten hit really hard. And we were like working with some people and delivering supplies and stuff. And I ended up meeting the leader of the the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe, this woman named Sherry Parfait. And she was telling me about how they eventually were going to need to like relocate. They were going to have to do managed retreat because the land is like disappearing so quickly. But in order to do that, rather than rely on the government, they were going to rely on organizations like nonprofits and educational institutions and elder wisdom and each other and the community. And they act like there were these really beautiful plans that they had collectively drawn up. And so the book draws quite a bit from my experience going down there and being in that area and talking to Indigenous leaders, who, although it does not exist yet, are aware that there is like another way to live, that there is another way to have a functional community that has adapted to climate change. But it requires believing in community and relying on each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And you see like the ingenuity and the resourcefulness of like everyday people in these disasters, and also you see it in the characters and in Happy Bad, and like how they figure out how to use like what's around them, and both like sort of physical things to protect themselves and to keep themselves safe and healthy, but also like sort of emotional resourcefulness, like the depths that they have to go to like keep moving forward is yeah, there's hope there. Someone in the chat asked, this sort of going back, but it's a question that I was interested in, is some of the writers and books that you've loved and that maybe have been an inspiration for this, but specifically Southern and like Southeastern writers. Are there books or writers that inform this, or just ones that you love that you want to share with us so we can make a little reading list?
Yeah, Jasmine Ward for sure. I mean, I don't know if I can say like inspired or drawn from, just like admire her as a brilliant Southern writer. Karen Russell, I will count as a Southern writer, even though she's from Florida. She still counts. But definitely, I mean, I feel like in my best moments of writing, I'm trying to follow after her shadow. George Saunders, who is a funny, weird Southern writer, which is also something that I want to emulate. Like, I think Southern writers are also like some of the best at being funny and weird. Carson McCullers, Edward P. Jones, again, just like Southern writers I admire. Flannery O'Connor, Sarah H. Broom wrote an incredible memoir about like East New Orleans.
Yeah.
And I think Nina Simone should count. She's from North Carolina, and she's, I mean, beyond brilliant. So anything I can do that feels like the shadow of an homage to her work. I listen to her a lot. So
yeah, cool. Well, I was going to ask you about sort of your work as a journalist and how it's informed your work as a novelist, but I think you kind of, I mean, you definitely touched on that in an earlier question, but is there more that you want to say about that? I'm curious about the sort of the brain switching and the code switching from and stylistic. Like, I mean, I've read both, obviously, and stylistically it's distinct. And what's that like as a writer, inhabiting those two different voices?
yeah, I've been thinking about that quite a bit recently. I think partially because like, let's see if I can articulate this at all. Like part of the reason I went into journalism, I think, was because like an increasing number of people, I mean, probably even on the Zoom call, I'd like experienced a little bit of climate disaster. And I felt that having that reported and made like more widely public and talked about would be something that like made meaning out of that experience. And I think it is meaningful, it's impactful. But also as time like passes and I kind of have more experiences like that, and also have like hear more people's individual stories, I think I become at the same time more aware that like that is not, of course, the thing that creates meaning, and meaning also is like very much we get it from, we make meaning of our experiences through like interpersonal reactions, and also interpersonal interactions is the word I'm trying to say, and cultural representation, seeing your experience represented, if not exactly, but in some sort of like emotionally parallel way, in media, I think speaks to that, like, I don't know, that hunger you feel sometimes, and you've been through something difficult or some kind of disaster where are like, this has to mean something. Like it can't just be something that like only I know about and have to carry with me forever.
Yeah.
And I think, like, just through having talked to more and more people through journalism, I think I am more aware than I maybe used to be, that how many people are kind of looking for ways to articulate worries about climate change, and also like the militarization of borders, and displacement and what that means for us. More and more of us have experienced it, and more of us can feel that that's meaningful to hear it narrativized. And narrativization is really important. Like journalism is one thing, but I don't think on a personal level you always get that much out of just like a dump truck of information and statistics. So I hope that like the book can also speak to people who kind of have that worry whispering their head. I'm both like distressed and pleased that it feels increasingly timely. And Publishers Weekly called it terrifyingly plausible, which is like worrying but good, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I was a fiction writer for like first, like before I was a journalist. And so it kind of feels weird to me that most people in my life now know me as a journalist, but I've also like always first and foremost understood and processed things on a like narrative writing level. So sometimes boiling it down to just spewing out information actually is like hard. And there's so much, so much that doesn't get through that way. You know, I feel very aware that when I'm writing journalism, like this is, I'm trying to make my hands as white as possible on the screen. Like this is as much as I get told. And then like, this is as much as I'm allowed to share. And then like, this is as much as makes it in the reporting. And then like, this is as much as makes it through editing. And then like, this is as much as people actually read because they only read like the first 300 words. So having a book and a narrative structure to actually like tell kind of a similar story, a similar material feels like, okay, finally, I can really tell like the full picture.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad for it because I am a person who needs it narrativized, and I want to connect and relate to, real people, characters, fictional characters, but they feel real to moi. And that's the way in which I learn about like larger systems. So thank you. There's one question I do want you to answer, and then I think we're going to open it up to sort of our larger small group here. But one of the visitors, guests asked if you've worked at an RTF, and if not, why place a story there? What kind of research did you do to conduct? What kind of research did you conduct to settle this story in that space?
I did not work like as a staff member in a residential, I think by resident RTF, they mean residential treatment center or foundation. I didn't work as staff, but I did volunteer for a little while as like what they would call a writing mentor. And that was kind of like my very first toe into anything that would inspire what became the book. Partially because I was so struck at the level of like vulnerability of the people who were living there, the young women who were living there, and at the same time, like the very high turnover in staff who like weren't themselves not getting the support they needed. And also for that reason, like sometimes they're underqualified or just, you know, have their own things that they're dealing with. And some stuff in the book is like that sometimes feels far-fetched is like drawn from that, the fact that at that particular treatment center I'm thinking of, where both girls who'd been removed from their homes because they were deemed like unsafe or neglectful, and also girls who had been diverted from like criminal diversions programs, and they had both been put in the same place because the thing that they all had in common was trauma. But that happened because of funding cuts. And then additionally, I talked to people who had worked as staff members at these centers or versions of these centers. Primarily talked to people in Utah because that's kind of where like the most intense stuff happens because of the way it's regulated or not regulated, and not legislated in a way that there's some problems in Utah with these centers. Some of them are kind of more like scared straight centers, but that's not what this is trying to do. And again, some of the things that were that seem like most surprising, I think, are driven from them speaking with me and sharing some of the stuff that they went through. Because they, like, this one person in particular who I think in the acknowledgements, she herself was like extremely shaken up by her experience working there. And had like been, you know, physically injured in the course of working there. And there's a little tidbit in the book about a girl who left a tampon in long enough to give herself toxic shock syndrome in order to get herself sent to the hospital so that she could escape. And that's I kind of hate being like, that's a true story, but that is something that was drawn from an interview with somebody who used to work there. So I did a little bit of both. Scarily spot on. Yeah. I'm glad and also very sorry that it rings true.
Well, thank you, Delaney. We'll
you.
hand it back over to Rachel, our host.
Yeah, thank you, Emily and Delaney. I'm going to bring Ui Zhao back in for our author to author segment. Thank you. And I'll start by asking a question, then I'll give the floor to you guys to talk to each other. But I'd love to hear about the reaction when you found out that your book was acquired by Astra House, an independent publisher, and particularly us.
Delaney, do you want to take a stab?
Sure, yeah. Also, hi, Emily. I really enjoyed hearing about your book, and I'm so excited to read it.
Same. So happy to.
Thank you. I was really excited, obviously. I was a little bit familiar with Astra because I've seen some of Astra's titles at like a sort of coffee shop that holds some Astra titles near me. And so I browsed through some of them before. And also I'm like, Astra is like the Goldilocks kind of publisher that I was hoping for, not like a huge publisher that you can kind of get lost in, but also still has like the attention, the resources that I would look for ideally in a publisher, and was like extremely extra excited to be working with Emily because Emily has represented or worked with some of the writers that I really love, like Lindsay Hunter and Lucia Berlin's writing as well. I just picked up Kitten Tits by coincidence, like right like the day that she and I had like a dinner recently without realizing that it was a book that she acquired. And so it was just like I just kissed Matt. We just had like have so much the same taste. And she also had like worked with some friends of mine who are writers, and she represents a lot of funny people. So yeah, I was just very excited to be working with Emily in particular.
Yeah, I also felt like over the moon, also a sense of kismet, like Delaney was saying. I just read several Astra titles in a row before I connected with Maya. I think something that I really admire about Astra is their willingness to take a chance on innovative subject matter or form. I'd read Esther Yee's book. I still don't know if I'm supposed to say Y/N or YN or your name, but Esther Yee's book about someone who's obsessed with Korean pop star. And I felt like it was like a work of high modernism that maybe wouldn't have found a home in bigger publishing houses or more commercial enterprises. I'd read Happy, which is also like an extremely formally innovative novel. And so it was, yeah, I thought I'd hallucinated the title, the imprint name that was in my email because I just read so many Astra titles, but I feel very lucky to be at a publisher where I think all of the editors are extremely ambitious, open-minded, like trying to push the envelope on fiction and what fiction can do in the contemporary literary landscape.
Thanks. I will let you guys ask each other's questions now.
Yeah, Delaney,
Yeah.
I have a question for you, kind of related to Emily's about working in journalism and fiction. I am very envious of your journalistic chops and that is a way that you can make sense of the world and bring things to people. And I'm curious how you feel about, I don't know, the different like metabolism speeds of the two genres and maybe how that's affecting your work now. I know that, you know, I'm not a journalist, so when I encounter all of these events in the world, I don't have that direct outlet to um, try to make sense of it for myself and others. Fiction has so many of the uh, unique capabilities that you describe, but also it just like takes a long time to write. So, yeah, how are you thinking about that? How is that affecting what you write day to day right now?
Yeah, totally. Like honestly, for that reason that you're describing, I think it can almost be like trap is too strong a word, but it does have that sort of like ability to do something bite-sized that feels like you're processing information or the events that are around you. And in the case of the woman I talked about, Sherry Parfait Dardar, the tribal leader, um, it was kind of like an obsession with her story that drove me to like pitch my first book because I don't know if you feel this way as well, but like I think part of what drives me towards fiction anyway, is this kind of like impulse to um like hold and preserve a story or to spark in other people a feeling that the story has sparked in you. Um, and because that story already existed and was true, journalism felt like the next best thing to try to like recreate or access that impulse. And yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know if this makes sense to say, but like journalism is to novels as like poetry is to short stories a little bit, just because sometimes, I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes it's just like, I need a quick little like jolt of good brain feeling, artist feeling. Poetry is that because I can read it in like a minute, as opposed to like a novella or a novel. Short story, what I said. My analogy is not holding up very well. But journalism in the same way, it feels like it's like this quick jump to when I feel like I need to process or make meaning of some kind of experience, whether or not it's something that's close to me. Yeah, it's like a shortcut to do that. But
Mm.
it's easy to like start doing that too much and then I fall off working on the novel.
That's so interesting to hear because I feel like, from my outsider perspective, um, I feel that journalism is so much more to the point and impactful on a just like day-to-day level. I'm like, if I care about something, you know, my novel that takes 3 years to to write and publish is going to take 3 years to write and publish, and God knows how many people will actually see it. But yeah.
I think lots of people will see it. But it's also like journalism, I don't know. I mean, not to sound real pessimistic, but like, does it make a difference? I don't know. Maybe like all together, all of it does. But any one story, only if you're super, super lucky. Or like a tiny little nudge in the same way that like, I mean, a book, I feel like if I'm reading, like great books have made me understand myself and the world better, or like what it means to like experience being a woman in the world for sure.
Yeah.
And that's really valuable. Just harder to measure than like how information affects legislation, policy, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
yeah.
that makes sense.
And I was wondering for you, I think you or Maya mentions like some of the other books it feels like your book is in conversation with. And someone mentioned, I think, Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle, which I definitely thought of. I was also thinking of Stephen Florida by Gabe Habash. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. It's like, yeah, it's like wrestling centric. And in both of those books, I was really struck by how, like, I am not a sports person, and one is about boxing and one is about wrestling, which are sports that I've never engaged with or watched at all. And they were like so absorbing. I was like so completely invested in them, and so tense. Um, and I wondered how hard you had to work at, or like if it was something that was difficult to be writing, like the actual, like the action scenes, like the sports scenes, the actual scenes of the matches. Did you end up having to like go back and ratchet until you felt like it was at the tension level that you wanted? Because I imagine that takes a lot of like balancing movement by movements that are happening really fast with, like, at the time when you're playing it, I imagine it's you're just like in a flow state, you're not really paying attention to that at all.
Yeah, that's a great question. Shout out to Stephen Florida. Gabe was actually one of my advisors and mentors at the University of Michigan. So everyone
Love
go read
Stephen
that
Florida.
book.
Hell
And it's interesting because he didn't wrestle at all. I assumed he had, but he ran cross country in high school and then just watched like hours of wrestling footage to write
Huh.
Stephen Florida. And I did, yes, throughout the drafting process, have to calibrate the action scenes quite a bit. I think actually my initial impulse in my first drafts, I didn't write enough of them because I'd seen so many that they just played in my mind, and I assumed that the reader knew what was happening and what that looked like and what it felt like. And I found myself having to go back and pace out more, like show more of those scenes and build up more of that narrative arc within the sport. And I think what made me that was interesting in conversation with the book as a whole because it forced me to be a spectator of something that I spent a lot of time being on the inside of, like you were saying, which is also the book's form, right? It's a lot of people watching this one very talented player at different times of his life when he's playing or just living. And um, I think actually helped me work through a lot of the internal dynamics within the characters. It became kind of a Proustian thing where um, by interweaving the action, like forcing myself to be grounded in the action and confronting what it brought out in the characters' minds, like I could tap into some things about them or about the book that I'd really struggled to articulate when I hadn't gotten into the table tennis scenes. Um, so that was a huge part of the revision process. And it's interesting because, like you said, when people play, they don't actually, a lot of times they're not having thoughts, or if you have a robust mental game, you're not supposed to have a lot of thoughts. There's a great David Foster Wallace essay about Tracy Austin and how her memoir is completely facile because she's not thinking that much when she plays tennis, even though she's great. Um, so yeah, all that is to say, yes, it was like a very essential part of even understanding what the whole book was about.
Cool. I love that.
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I could listen to you both talk about your work all day, but I fear that we have hit time. Thank you again for joining us today. Special thanks to Emily Zhao, Delaney, Emily Bell, and Maya for those fascinating conversations. We hope you feel inspired to go out and read these fantastic debut novels. A reminder that you can request digital copies of both Underspin and Happy Bad on Edelweiss and NetGalley. If you prefer physical copies, please email us at agepublicity@astrahouse.com. Enjoy the rest of your day and happy reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.